Thank you. And thank you. And we will get this event started now by briefly introducing our three candidates. I do want to mention one thing, that the special meeting for the election or for the Central Committee to make a recommendation for the candidate is February 14th. And it is a special meeting, and it will begin at 6:30 instead of 7:30. So make sure that you do have the correct time for the event to begin. So we have three candidates this evening. Our first candidate is Ariana B. Kelly. Our next candidate is Scott Allen Weber. And the final candidate is Jason R. Woodward. Ariana serves as the Vice Chair of the Maryland House Health and Government Operations Committee and Chair of the Health Occupations and Long-Term Care Subcommittee. She also chairs the Joint Committee on Children, Youth, and Families. She is a longtime resident of District 16 and graduated from Walter Johnson High School, where she developed her passion for advocacy on public health. She served as the executive director of NARAL Pro-Choice Maryland and was named Legislator of the Year by the Mental Health Association of Maryland. Welcome, Ariana Kelly. Our next candidate is Scott Allen Weber. Mr. Weber lives in Bethesda and is raising children in the local school system. He has been self-employed since the age of 7 years old. His current business focuses on the integration of technology into his clients' lives. He is a community activist, a human rights activist, a housing activist, a public health activist, a planet health activist, a gun safety activist, and more. Welcome, Scott Weber. Our next candidate is Jason Woodward. He has spent part of his career in the area of education, healthcare, armed services, and the federal civil service. In fact, he began his career teaching public health courses at Kansas State University before moving on to the military. He also is a small business owner and currently lives in Cabin John. And as a parent of a child with special needs, he is acutely aware of the need for adequate educational funding and resources to support enrolled children and their families. Welcome, Jason Woodward. So we will begin today by letting you just sort of give a 5-minute introduction of yourself. And in that introduction, we would like for you to include the answer to this question: why are you qualified to fill the vacancy to represent District 16 in the Maryland Senate? So we will start with Ariana Kelly, 5 minutes, and then we'll go on to Scott Weber and Jason Woodward.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Elliot. I wrote down, thank Elliot, because I didn't want to forget. He does so much work for us on the District 16 Club. But really, thank you for having us here. Thank you to Scott and Jason for joining us, and the Honorable Karen Brito for moderating this. Thanks to the Central Committee as well as the D16 Democratic Club. It is such a privilege representing this community as I have for the last 12 years. I want to talk to the District 16 Club members here tonight. Thank you for your support and your ideas, your constructive feedback. The times that you have elected me 4 times to represent you, most recently with 41,600 votes. So I hope that answers Karen Brito's question. Thank you for sending Mark and Sarah to serve with me. The 3 of us make a great team, and we are so proud of Susan and so excited to partner with the Moore administration. We are looking forward to welcoming a new team member, but certainly I hope that will be in the delegate seat. Most of you know me really, really well by now, but if you don't know me yet, who am I and why do I do this work? As Karen mentioned, I'm a former PBS journalist. I worked in advocacy at NARAL, Girls Inc., and Moms Rising. Now I run a health clinic with my husband in Montgomery Village. I'm a public school graduate and a public school parent of a special needs child. I have a proven voting record on the issues that matter to our district. And if you wonder why having a proven voting record is better than promises of a future voting record, you should ask me why marriage equality did not pass in 2011. If anyone else remembers that, we can talk about that when my 5 minutes is up. But I'm so much more than all of those things. Nobody likes a bragger, and we're all here though. So I just want to be clear, without bragging, I really do feel like I am a great legislator. Nobody starts as a great legislator, and I certainly did not. It is a learned skill, and I have learned so much over the last 12 years. I have the experience to do this job in the Senate really well. I am also a serious policy wonk. We're here in District 16, so we're proud to be full of big nerds. That is what District 16 is, and I fit right in. I am an intersectional feminist. I look at issues of race and class and gender all together to work to improve society. I work to advance a family economic security agenda. Why do I do that? I do that because I grew up in Bethesda, but I was not rich. My parents were teenagers when they started their family, and they really struggled to make ends meet. I know my Uncle Vincent is on this call tonight. I think my Aunt Kathy might be as well. Uncle Vincent is my mother's brother. Aunt Kathy is my father's sister. They knew me as I was growing up in Bethesda. My family's struggles had a huge impact on me as a child, and that inspires the work that I do every day. But it is not about my own personal agenda. I respond to the needs of my community. During the peak of COVID, my weekly emails were shared not just in District 16, but across the county and praised as the go-to resource on COVID. Like a college kid, I was pulling all-nighters to gather and analyze that information for our community, and I am proud of that work. I am so thankful that I was able to help people during a crisis, because to me, that is what government is for. Our district, District 16, is an aging district, and I feel a special responsibility to protect seniors and the elderly, but not just seniors. I have passed nearly 100 pieces of legislation, 100, to improve all people's lives. A number of them have been groundbreaking and nationally recognized. Just last year, I authored and defended the Abortion Care Access Act, which was the most comprehensive abortion access law in the country, and it's deeply rooted in health equity and reducing health disparities. This year, I'm in the legislature leading a 4-bill package to address the overturning of Roe versus Wade. I have a press conference tomorrow morning with Governor Moore and Lieutenant Governor Aruna Miller to unveil those bills. So if I seem a little distracted or I don't have answers on the spot to your questions, it's because I've been preparing for that all day. I'm also working with the White House Gender Policy Council to coordinate federal and state actions in pro-choice states during this really complex time for reproductive health. But it's more than just that kind of work I'm doing. I was lead co-sponsor of the Time to Care Act, which was the culmination of 12 years of work for me on paid family and medical leave policies. I received national recognition for a law I passed working with my daughter when she was in middle school to require the teaching of consent in sex education. I received national recognition for work I did reforming the state employee harassment and discrimination policies. I passed the law requiring insurance coverage for autism treatment and a lot of other laws and regulations to help kids and adults with disabilities. I passed laws establishing child care tax credits and expanding child care subsidies for low-income families. I have been named Legislator of the Year more than a dozen times from a wide range of statewide groups. I know Karen mentioned that. It's important for me to note that I do prioritize diversity, equity, and inclusion in all of my work, my hiring and my mentorship, because I believe deeply in the value of this work. I want to be District 16 Senator because, like all of you, I believe in the democratic values of economic opportunity, social justice, and racial equality. I believe in environmental stewardship, public education, gun safety reform, so much work to do this year on that. I believe in excellent constituent service and the ability of government to serve the people. And I know, again, without bragging, I know that without a doubt, as we face this vacancy in District 16, I'm the person who is best equipped to serve the district and make meaningful legislative progress on the issues that are important to us as Democrats. So that is why I would like to be the senator, and I hope I can count on your support. And again, want to close as I open by acknowledging Delegate Sarah Love and Delegate Mark Corman, who are here tonight, and also just really excellent representatives for District 16. And I'm so thankful that they're here tonight. And I know that they share my appreciation to Elliot and the D16 Democratic Club. Thank you.
Thank you, Ariana Kelly. We'll go on now.
Did I do okay on my time? I did it, right?
Yes. And Elliot is the timekeeper, so he'll let us know if anyone goes over. Next, we have Scott Weber, And you have 5 minutes to describe your background, talk about what you'd like, and also why are you qualified to fill the vacancy? Scott?
Yes, my thanks to President
Okay.
Greenwald and Honorable Ms. Brito, and thank you for providing this fabulous First Amendment opportunity to speak to our collective community. I welcome this opportunity to be here on stage with Delegate Kelly and Mr. Woodward, and for all of those of you who are watching. Thanks for being part of democracy. I am Scott Weber. I'm a Bethesda resident, as you heard, since 1995. I have raised 2 boys in both the public and the private school systems. That includes NIH Preschool, Washington Episcopal School, Somerset, Pyle, Whitman, Seven Locks, Landon, University of Pennsylvania, Georgetown, and finally Howard. I have 3 generations of teachers in my family, so I understand education extremely well from all different angles. I'm a Midwesterner. I was born in North Dakota, spent my early days in the Chicago suburbs, and then in the early 70s, my family moved to Lafayette, Indiana, where they mostly remain today, and that's Pennsland. So I will tell you, I do understand red conservative America as well. My grandparents were farmers from a very, very small town, so I understand rural America, and I understand farming. The rest of my story sits on my resume. My academic career came from University of Maryland, College Park. It was in conflict management and systems design, where I will say, I'm proud to say I graduated from the University Honors Program, summa cum laude. I was #1 in my graduating class. I even gave the commencement address. But I can promise you, I was not the smartest guy there in the room, but I will say I was probably the hardest working because I always did my homework. I understand what it's like to have to put yourself through school, but it takes hard work. It isn't given to you. By vocation, I am a professional problem solver. That's literally what I've been my entire life. I've been self-employed. I'm a businessman who understands small business needs and their frustrations. I'm a licensed realtor, although so I do understand the housing market, but I'm even more focused on housing policy, especially affordable housing. I'm an expert in foreclosure law, so I'm also a homeowner myself, and so I understand what it's like to be in Montgomery County and being here in District 16, and our housing and our affordable housing issues that are a real issue with both the older spectrum of our residents and even someone who's trying to come in as a newer millennial. Most of you know me because I'm a passionate community activist. I consider myself fiscally conservative, but passionately progressive, libertarian. I've been involved deeply in politics since my work on the Clinton campaign, and then later on, his wife's. Whether you know me as my work with the Maryland Dems, with the MCDCC, the Jaywalkers, Do the Most Good, the Women's Democratic Club, or dozens of campaigns. I am an activist, and it's a gun activist, and I'm a women's rights activist, and I was on the Supreme Court steps banging on the doors of the Supreme Court for Kavanaugh. I do believe that we need a democracy, and we need fairness, we need justice, so I'm a justice warrior. I'm going to leave it at that point. I've only got a couple minutes left in this, but actually, I take it back. I will go into. In fact, I'm a policy wonk. I dig into policy. I've got Mega Ledge on my bookmarks. I understand statute. I understand rules. I understand COMAR. I understand how they interact with each other. I understand what it's like to be in Annapolis. I've testified dozens of times. I've met our good delegates there in their office, and I appreciate all the work they do, but it's also daunting, and I truly understand how much work it really is. But I guess as your senator, to be direct to the question, I bring a different set of perspectives. Delegate Kelly and our other delegates have their lanes, and they are really very, very good at what they do. And I have no criticism of that. But I do have expertise in different areas, whether it's technology or whether it's housing, that can add to the delegation. It's not just a matter of moving one from one spot to another, in this case, whether it's moving from the delegate's seat to a senator's seat. But with that, I'm afraid it doesn't really bring any new ideas or new passions to the equation. It actually just empties a seat. So with that, what I do believe I do is I bring in everything that they have. I know Delegate Kelly's got, I think it's 35 bills she's in. She's extremely active in that regard, and she's actually the primary sponsor in a good handful of those. I'm worried what might happen if indeed she were to leave and abandon all those bills. So what I'm able to do, and actually having looked at them, I would probably vote for every single one that's there. But I could do that in the Senate, adding to her voice as a delegate. She'd make a wonderful senator. I'm not going to argue about that. But I think it would then just take away from our district as its representation rather than adding to it. So With that, I will leave. I've got 10 seconds to go to say that I think what I would do is add diversity from a whole nother perspective to the equation. I thank you and look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Scott Weber. We'll move on to Jason Woodard.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank everyone who is on this call and for the organization. I want to go ahead and acknowledge the significant contributions of Delegate Kelly over the last several years. Very impressive background and resume. And Scott, the same as you, I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce myself to those of you that do not know me. I am originally a Midwesterner as well. I was born and raised in Kansas, in Wichita, Kansas. And it was a great place to grow up, but it did not exactly align with my political thinking. And when I left graduate school, I joined the military. I joined the Army, in part to leave Kansas and to experience new opportunities, new environments, and different people from what I saw and experienced as a child. Ultimately, I wound up in Maryland about 20 years ago as one of my final military assignments, and spent time at the Pentagon working on staff work and policy coordination. I also did a lot of recruiting during the early part of the original Iraq War in the early 2000s, or the second one, I should say. And when I left active duty service, I moved into the federal government, where I served several years as a senior executive for an Office of Inspector General. And a few years ago, I left that in order to work with my husband at our small business. It's called Opal, which we are a small company here in the county, based out of Cabin John. We have two children, Maddie and Patrick, who are twins. Maddie, we like to say, is our 9-year-old going on 17, and Patrick is a delightful little guy who, you can't ask for a nicer person, despite all the issues that he has to contend with his learning disabilities and some of his mobility issues. But it's reason to get you up in the morning and appreciate what you have in front of you. My background, as you mentioned, was originally is in public health. I'm also a registered dietitian. What I believe that I bring to the table is that I provide a different viewpoint and another option for consideration, given a background that stretches across many different sectors, from small business and construction, healthcare, education, public service. And I think it's important to point out that public service oftentimes are the things that people never hear about or know about when you're not in elected office. It's the people in the trenches that are working hard to try to do the right thing for the communities and for the people around them. And in addition, I'd like to see someone in the Senate that's reflective of my background and what my family looks like here within the district.
Great. Thank you, Jason Woodard. Now we have several questions that were submitted in advance, and we'll start with those. And those will revolve around the Democratic Party, the Maryland General Assembly structure, legislative issues, and general issues are, on various questions. So why don't we start with the Democratic Party question, and we will begin with Scott Weber, go on to Jason Woodard, and Ariana Kelly will be third. What have you done to support or advance the Democratic Party agenda? Scott Weber.
Well, one of the things I mentioned is I'm a technologist, and so most people don't actually see me, but I'm behind the scenes. With the Democratic Party, I actually was part of the data team for several years that actually went in and dug deep into everything, into the party structures, everything it filled, the various back-end databases, getting all the way down into the Phoenix level of party data support. I have been not only at the state level, but in the local level. I provide back-end technical support. I get them up online. I get them, I do a lot of videography for them. At the grassroots level, which I think is actually the most important, I was one of the founding members of the Jaywalkers Action Group. I actually put together the entire data set that built the mailing list for it. I helped design the entire program through Action Network to get them out. I had the privilege, if you will, of actually designing the entire remote phone bank system that got phone bank sachets into the houses to be able to have people who didn't understand technology be able to set up a Wi-Fi system and an electronic recording system to be able to get the grassroots involved. So one of the things I've done probably more than anything else is get lots and lots and lots of other people involved in democracy. And I think that is a key element of what you have to do as a legislator, but then find out what their needs are and then bring it, whether it's to Annapolis or bring it on up into the chain. But the whole idea of having everybody be able to provide their input and have no limitations is probably the greatest element I've been able to bring to the party. There's lots and lots of additional people in the trenches doing really good things.
Great, thank you. One thing I neglected to answer, for all these questions, we will ask everyone to limit their answers to 2 minutes, and everyone's been great on the timing. So 2 minutes. And Jason Woodard, what have you done to support or advance the Democratic Party agenda?
So I believe this goes into more than just an agenda, but it's also a mindset and the ideals that are the backbone of the Democratic Party and the Democratic ideal. As a healthcare professional, my goal always was to do what was right for the patient and try to improve their livelihoods. And at the end of the day, I think that's the most important key element of the Democratic Party and how we move forward to improve the lives of others. So whether it be from a teaching perspective, to empower people to learn the skill sets to improve their own lives, from a healthcare perspective, helping individuals understand and learn different ways to improve their own well-being and public health, as well as providing the generalized support and the dedication that's required. When I was in the military and in civil service, I had one responsibility where I had a hotline where we would get 40,000 calls in a year and emails and letters, and trying to triage those and finding the best avenues and resources for our veterans and their families to ensure that there were places they could go, people they could speak to, and resources that they could utilize in order to make their lives better. And that's something that I've done my entire life. I was raised by a bunch of very strong women who said, public service is where you need to be, and that's where your focus should be. And that's what I believe that I bring to the Democratic Party.
Thank you. Ariana Kelly.
There we go. I'm on. Thank you so much. I loved hearing everybody's answers. I was taking notes as they were talking too, because I didn't want to forget my chain of thought. So forgive me. I wanted to start with a story. So when I was a little girl growing up, my grandma, my grandpa had these coffee mugs, and they said, if you want to live like a Republican, you better vote like a Democrat. And from the time I was a little girl and I was drinking out of those little coffee mugs, I thought, what does this mean? What is this about? And that's sort of when I think of my core values as a Democrat, that's what it is. I think everybody deserves the opportunity to have a safe and secure family life and a future with economic security in it. It's important to me. So I have done a number of things to advance the Democratic agenda, particularly in that space. As I mentioned in my opening, for 12 years, I worked on the Time to Care Act. I have this little plaque here that the Time to Care Coalition gave me that means everything to me. I started that work. Again, it's a piecemeal approach we had to take to that. We passed legislation providing parental leave for state employees. Delegate Corman was instrumental in getting that across the finish line at the last seconds of session one day. We passed legislation protecting small business employees to make sure that they had protections when they needed parental leave as well, but we didn't want to focus just on parents. Eventually, we got a task force to look. It studied for 2 years how we could help people with their own illnesses, people who are giving caregiving for their elderly and disabled relatives. We've passed a task force. We looked at it for 2 years. Eventually, we got the bill passed. It took 12 years of hard work. And the interesting thing about how that advances the democratic agenda is not only does it help people, which is a core democratic value, it provided economic security, prevented people from falling into poverty at a time of crisis in their lives or a time of great joy if you're talking about new children. But it also was one of the 2 pieces, well, Governor Hogan, let's be clear, vetoed a number of pieces of legislation. I passed 2 of them last year. I passed the Time to Care Act, where I was the primary co-sponsor, and my dear friend Chris Valderrama and Senator Antonio Hayes were the lead sponsors. And I also passed the Abortion Care Access Act. Both of those were vetoed by Governor Hogan, and that's important. I wish we had a governor who wouldn't veto them, and now we do, which is awesome. But the vetoes help us elect more Democrats, so we were able to draw that contrast. Thank you.
Great. Now we'll begin with Jason Woodard, go on to Ariana Kelly and Scott Weber. We elect multiple members of the General Assembly in each legislative district. District 16 has long had a strong and effective multi-member team. How will you work with the other District 16 legislators to serve the district? And what are examples from your professional experience that demonstrates that style of teamwork? And we'll begin with Jason Woodard.
Well, I think that the first thing to acknowledge is the outstanding delegation that we've had over the last several years. I don't think anybody could deny that. And I think it's important to acknowledge Delegate Corman in his majority leader role, as well as Delegate Kelly in her prestigious position as the vice chair. My entire life has been spent working across the aisle, if you will. You don't grow up in Kansas and have a different political viewpoint without figuring out a way to get along with people and making things happen. I've had a long period of time where I spent as a supervisor of hundreds of employees, where you're trying to create a team environment to grow and not only allow other people to learn how to do better for themselves, but also to grow and create a better environment within the work environment. So I believe that it's a good place for us to start, to know that there's great leadership already in the House of Delegates, and knowing that we likely really get along from a perspective that.
Thank you, Ari. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
Are you finished?
I was, it glitched out, so I wasn't sure if you could.
Okay, we did hear you. Thank you. Ariana Kelly.
Thank you so much for this question. I love it. And particularly, I'm looking at the questions in the chat also, and I saw Carol Ann Greenbird's question in the chat about what you learned most from Senator Lee. I have a couple answers to that because I have learned a lot from her, but it fits really nicely into your question, Karen. So I came into the District 16 team with Senator Frosch and then Delegate Susan Lee, and also Bill Frick, former Delegate Bill Frick. And I learned from Brian Frosch what it meant to be a teammate, what it meant to lead a team, what it meant to support your team, what it meant to mentor a new legislator coming into the legislature. I learned from Susan Lee just this incredible sense of patience. Let me be clear. I know most of you on this call know this, particularly because you're District 16 Club members. You know, Susan did double or triple duty as a legislator, because not only was she an excellent legislator, but she was also a woman legislator and a woman of color legislator. And that meant she faced extra obstacles, and she did it so gracefully, right? What they say about Ginger Rogers, dancing backwards in high heels. And I learned how she did that with tremendous patience. So I was able to learn from Bill Frick, from Brian Frosch, from Susan Lee, the teamwork makes the dream work model of District 16 work. And I really look forward to paying that forward in the new team as we welcome a new team member. I think I've already praised as much love as humanly possible on Mark and Sarah, but I could do it all day long. I want to make sure every District 16 Club member knows here tonight that I was having a meeting with the repro rights folks on the press conference we have tomorrow. And the first thing out of my mouth was, we have to get Sarah involved in this because she's brilliant in this space. Let's make sure when I go from the House to the Senate that we're making sure she's got our backs here. She already knows how to do this and she's brilliant. So part of being in District 16 is seeing each other's strengths and not being threatened by each other. And, you know, Mark is similarly identified, right? He's not threatened, he shares, he's cooperative. I love working with this team for exactly that reason.
Time.
And I will continue that ethic.
Scott Weber, same question.
I appreciate the question. My undergraduate degree was in conflict management, diplomacy, essentially. My whole perspective is how do you get people who don't agree to be able to agree with each other, to find some sort of a common goal that will actually achieve the outcome that is least acceptable to everybody. That's my entire academic philosophy. It's what I've done my entire life. My other side of that piece is I'm a professional problem solver by trade. I walk into environments that I quite often have no idea what to expect. First thing I have to do is I have to listen. I have to find out what the needs are of the client. I have to get up to speed on everything from a content perspective that I may not know enough about to be able to gather the needs of the actual people there on the line. And then I'm able to then convey and to assess what their spoken needs are with their needs that they don't know about, and then to assess and pull in other resources to come out with an outcome that I then feed back to them, that they then can provide the feedback as to whether they think it would work. And then together we create a solution that my greatest compliment is I then walk away when it's finished and I hardly ever hear back from them again, because it's actually their project, it's their end goal, it's their solution. And in the end, it becomes just a matter of checking in and saying it works great, or we go back and we tweak it a little. But it's a matter of listening, it's a matter of assessing new situations, it's a matter of finding resources, and it's a matter of applying it as needed to the actual clients, or in this case, constituents. So I would work very well with any group that I walk into, because we're going to have a common goal. We want to serve our District 16, we want to serve the Democratic Party, we want to serve our citizens of Maryland and the entire state.
Thank you. I just want to note to the candidates, if you feel like you want to take notes on questions, et cetera, you are free to do that. The next question, we will begin with Ariana Kelly, move on to Scott Weber, and then to Jason Woodard. What committee would you like to serve on in Annapolis and why? And what would be your priority issues for your first year in the state Senate?
Thank you for your question. And it is a bit of a trick question because I've been walking around Annapolis for a couple of weeks with people being like, you know, where the vacancy is over in the Senate, right? So Susan did a masterful job doing some of the hardest work there is to do in Annapolis, serving on the Judicial Proceedings Committee. And that's where the open Senate seat is at this moment, which means that I am to take over her role on that committee. Now, I will tell you, I have served 12 years in the legislature, and I have passed exactly one piece of legislation out of those 100 bills from the Judiciary Committee, because I've focused most of my work on family economic security, as I talked about earlier, as well as healthcare, where I'm the vice chair of the Healthcare Committee. So a lot of folks who have a vested interest in keeping me, you know, lobbyists who do healthcare, for example, want to keep me here. Like, you sure you want to go to JPR? And my answer is the biggest reproductive rights bill of the session is in JPR. The End of Life Options Act, which District 16 Club members know is incredibly important in our district, is in JPR. There are gun bills in JPR. This session is going to be a huge session for the Judicial Proceedings Committee, and I'm so excited to go there and work with Chairman Smith. It's going to be a very exciting year to be there. Long term, I would like to be on the Finance Committee because Montgomery County only has one member on the Finance Committee. We really need to have two. We're the economic engine of the state, and they do all of the healthcare policy. Thank you.
Thank you. Scott Weber, what committee would you like to serve on in Annapolis and why? And what would be your priority issues for your first year in the state Senate?
Without any qualifications, judicial proceedings would be my #1 choice in the Senate. I have been working with, as you know, real estate and with housing and in space foreclosure. And real property is actually one of the tenets of foundations of JPR. We're going to have a real issue coming up with the COVID forbearances that finished. We're seeing a flood of people who starting to have their homes foreclosed again. Montgomery County is a little better off, but Prince George's County, for example, has 3 times the number of foreclosures that are already in the channel. I know that law inside and out. It is something that is very, very broken. You can have somebody literally be notified that their house is going to foreclosure from somebody who's not even licensed or allowed to foreclose on it, and they will have zero opportunity to go before a court to have an evidentiary hearing before the house is actually sold. And it's all right now, for example, at discretion of judges if there is sufficient need, for example, to hold a hearing. That's unacceptable. For something as serious as putting a family out onto the streets, ripping them out of their schools, taking away generations of wealth, it has to be enough so that there's any opportunity for someone to stay in their home. You've got to give them that opportunity, whether it's restructuring it with the banks, whether it's restructuring it through the service providers, or quite often even just finding that they don't have the legal opportunity to do so. But if you don't have the wherewithal to do it, going through with a lawyer, etc., you can lose your house in months. So that would be my primary focus, would be actually looking at affordable housing and trying to keep people in their homes rather than having them foreclosed upon, which then adds pressure not only to the rental market, but they've got a foreclosure on their hands as well in their credit, making it all the more difficult. So if it happens in Montgomery County, their chances of coming back here are significantly reduced by the laws that are on the books. And so I've been working with Chairman Smith one-on-one. I've got a dozen bills that are sort of cooking in the works. I'd like to actually be able to put those over the finish line before we run into another 2008-2009 housing crisis.
Thank you. Same question, Jason Woodard.
So my understanding is that President Ferguson has already set committee assignments, so it would be JPR for this Senate seat. From that perspective, I think that long-term, I would be very interested in the Finance Committee based upon my background as a public health official, as well as a small business owner. So I have a unique interest there. But from the JPR perspective, I think that there are a lot of very important bills that that are in front of us this year. From the gun safety 2023, the Senate bills 86 and 113. I've got a vested interest in those as a parent, and just working in the military and knowing the importance of mental health issues and concerns there, and how that can be impactful of gun safety. I also believe that it's important to have someone as an inspector general over the entirety of some of our state governments and agencies to root out fraud, waste, and abuse. Have a big interest in violent crime from the perspective that it has gone up approximately 15% over the last couple of years. So I think all those things can and should be addressed based upon my sitting on the JPR.
Thank you. So the next question is, what is your position on an amendment to the Maryland Constitution to protect reproductive rights? We'll start with Scott Weber, go on to Jason Woodard, and then Ariana Kelly.
I would be at the front line of the vote to make sure it passes, and if it takes a little bit of yelling and screaming, I would be right there in the front. I say proudly, I was out there in the protests, and I was at the Supreme Court doors, banging on the doors with Kavanaugh coming in, because we understood what was happening if it ever got to that point. The risk of Roe v. Wade being overturned was absolutely apparent, and there were thousands and thousands of us. So I would be there in the legislature, pushing it at every element. And this comes to me a simple, basic, if not a human right, but certainly an absolute, even a moral right, if not a religious right, for a woman to make her own choices about her own body. End of story. That is liberty, that is freedom, that is everything that is imbued within our Constitution at the national level, at the state level. There just is no other choice. And so you would not have any position other than fighting for a full constitutional amendment for that right to make one's own choice about something that is the most critical, most sensitive, most personal of matters, and that being their own body. So I believe in bodily freedom, and that right is absolutely for the woman. Let's fight for it.
Thank you. Jason Woodard, same question.
Absolutely, this needs to be enshrined, period, full stop. I mentioned that I grew up in Kansas, and the city where I grew up was Wichita. And as a child and as a teen, I remember the abortion protests that went on every single day when you would drive down the street on the east side of Wichita. And in fact, many of you may remember that Dr. George Tiller died because someone killed him, and he was one of the lone abortion providers within Kansas. So I think it is very important, especially as a father of a little girl. I also think it's very important, given the fact that I have had family members who are victims of sexual assault, and I have friends who didn't know what to do or how to deal with an impending pregnancy, given some of the strict requirements of their family. So I think that this is something that we need to have more conversations about, not only enshrining it, but I think that there needs to be a more proactive discussion with men. I think men need to have more of a conversation and be out in front of this issue, because that is where some of the issues and concerns come from, because the people are scared of having somebody know, their father know, or somebody like that know, for fear that something bad will happen. So I think it's normalizing this, having more conversations about it, is exactly what we need moving forward.
Thank you. Ariana Kelly.
Thank you so much. And I am so excited to hear the strong support for the Speaker's constitutional amendment. That really excites me. I was able to defend that bill on the House floor last year, and it passed the House, although it didn't get a vote in the Senate. This year, it is being cross-filed by Senate President Ferguson, a man, which is great. I have a 4-bill package that we're working on, and Senator Ferguson is cross-filing one, Chairman Smith is cross-filing one, Delegate Rosenberg is cross-filing one, and one of them is our own delegate, Sarah Loves. So it's very exciting to see this invigoration in terms of reproductive rights in the state of Maryland. I will say that it was before my bill last year, the Abortion Care Access Act, it was 30 years before we had a piece of legislation related to abortion on the House floor or the Senate floor in the state of Maryland. We did the Question 6 referendum and then nothing for 30 years. But the need was growing and growing. So I was really proud to pass the Abortion Care Access Act last year. I was really proud that Governor Westmore, on his first day in office, released the $3.5 million in training funds for clinical training that was a part of the work of that bill. I'm so excited that President Biden is looking at that legislation as a national model and building a network of progressive pro-choice states to follow up with developing training funds like that. I'm so honored to speak at this press conference tomorrow with Governor Moore on our legislative package this year. And I will just close by saying that yesterday in the House cafeteria, I was with David for Senate cafeteria. Corman and Love know this. We don't have one in the House. That's the benefit of going to the Senate. I was eating with Delegate Fraser Hidalgo, and a woman came up to me and she said, "I can't, I work in the state, but I just want to tell you, the work you did last year on abortion access meant the world to me." And I hear that all the time, not just for my abortion work, but also my autism work and a lot of the other work I do. But, we do this, and I know from Scott and Jason's comments, they feel we do it for the people. So thank you.
Okay, great. I'm going to start combining some of these questions because we really want to get to some of the questions that came in tonight. One question that came in advance is it is time to take the steps in reducing exposure to forever chemicals such as PFAS, polyfluoroalkyl. Would you support a bill similar to the new California law reducing the use of PFAS in textiles? And they mentioned that it's also in cleaners, textiles, leather, paper, paints, and firefighting products. And the second part of this question is, what else would you like to do to address the climate and environment? And we will start with Jason Woodard.
Thank you. Yes, I would support a ban, but I do believe also that we have to look at how that will impact the use in, I believe, firefighting foam, for one example. So I think that while I'm in favor of a ban, I think we also have to look at how that can be implemented and done in a smart, economical way. From the perspective of, what was the second part of your question? I'm sorry.
And what else would you like to do to address the climate and the environment?
Got it. I think that we've made great progress within the state so far as going forward with renewable sources of energy, as well as some of the programs that have been developed to try to improve even access for household improvements to reduce energy needs. I think that there's more that we can do, though, and I'm still concerned about how we balance the cost of some of that to ensure that the people that need it the most, to improve some of the energy efficiency within their homes and within their utility usage, can be supported, because I think approximately 20% of our neediest are utilizing some of the programs to improve some of their energy efficiency, which therein also affects the climate, but there's so many that are not. And I think we need to do a better job to promote some of this to ensure that people know what's out there, so we can work together to improve the environment at all levels, affluent down to our poorest and neediest.
Thank you. Ariana Kelly, same question.
Thank you, Karen. So teamwork makes the dream work, right? So I mentioned I have a great District 16 legislative team, and the leader on PFAS in the Maryland General Assembly by far is Delegate Sarah Love. Now, let me say, when I worked at Moms Rising, I did lead the environmental health campaign for Moms Rising, and I learned quite a bit about chemicals and the danger that they can pose. I did a lot of work in that space on the federal level and at the state level. And I do serve on the healthcare committee, where some of these chemical related bills come through. When Delegate Sarah Love comes through with a bill like a PFAS bill, I am going to strongly support her, and I'm going to have her back. I'm going to defer to her because she has tremendous expertise. Despite what I explained about my background, I will tell you, Sarah knows more. Sarah's worked harder. Sarah spent a lot more time digging into these issues. So what I do is, and I employ that teamwork model that we talked about before. And I say, hey, Sarah, explain this to me. Tell me about this. How do you think I should vote on this piece of legislation? And I'm going to draw on her to gain her support. Sarah and Kumar Barve, who's the chair of the Environment and Transportation Committee, and I had a conversation just this morning about next steps on climate. The reality is that in the legislature, we do have this committee structure. So we have to depend on our colleagues to both learn information about the bills that are coming through their committees, because there's such a tremendous number of bills. And we have to trust people who share our similar values some of the time to share their judgment. So that's what I do. Right. When a PFAS bill comes before my committee, I listen. Of course, I listen to the firefighters. A lot of the firefighters are saying these things are dangerous for us, and we would like to not have danger involved in our careers. And the long-term health impacts are very dangerous. My grandfather was a firefighter, and I treasure the work of the fire service. So I do keep that in mind. But that's my answer. I think I've gone over my 2 minutes, but I want to give Sarah credit for her leadership in this space.
Thank you. Scott Weber.
There are experts out there from the firefighting perspective, but also the chemists, and there are also people who understand public health. And I think in the end, because this is a danger, it's a public health issue, one of the things I think we need to start looking at in many of these bills too is when we look at the economic impact, and there's every part of a bill has a fiscal analysis of it. But we have to start looking at some of these in a much bigger perspective. It's not just firefighters and their foam. It is indeed what is the total cost of all the healthcare associated with those who've gotten sick with it. How do we find the research to find a replacement for it? And whether it has to do with turning gas cars into electric cars, you get the research going, you get our National Institutes of Health, or you get our research, level 1 research institutions in. Let's just find a solution for it. We've identified the problem. So let's look at things at a much larger perspective with our partners here within not only the federal system, but our educational system. The ability to go after all these things, including environment, tying into that. We have to know the costs, the long-term costs. These are big systems. It's not just a little narrow bill. So the cost of our environment, but I'm going on to Jason's comment, getting every single citizen to understand what part they can do, because the tens of millions of people collectively doing a little bit has an enormous impact. It also gives an attitudinal switch that if you understand that saving our environment and our kids' future is that important, you will support things such as windmill farms, and you will support education within our higher education institutions on wind and solar and geothermal education. So we take that up into an engineering perspective to find solutions, but people have to know how important it is. And the cost of not doing something and just burying it and kicking it down the line is far, far more expensive than finding a really good solution and letting Maryland be that center for innovation and then implementation of these solutions.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to combine a couple of more questions that have are different subject matter, but we want to get through these so we can get to the ones that came in tonight. The first question is, what do you propose to do to help prevent gun violence in Maryland? And the second question is, what is your position on legislation that would allow people with terminal illnesses to avoid suffering and to die with dignity on their own terms? So I'll repeat that again. What do you propose to do to help prevent gun violence in Maryland? And what is your position on legislation that would allow people with terminal illnesses to avoid suffering and to die with dignity on their own terms? We'll start with Scott Weber, go on to Jason Woodard, and then on to Ariana Kelly.
I am a vehement supporter of gun legislation that provides sensible alternatives. I grew up in the Midwest. Everybody's a hunter. They've got the gun in the rack in the back of the truck. I understand the gun culture for hunting, but when it comes to the fact of you're hunting down school children or you're hunting down abortion care providers or you're hunting, that has to stop. We do not need anything in the assault weapon category in our population. Alternatively, if you want to have that kind of a weapon, I believe strongly in regulating it at a training level. Just like you need a license for a car, you need a license to shoot a gun, and you need to go in and need to know what you're doing, and you know how to do it, and you need to go back, have background checks that have a continuous cycle to say that you are safe to own a bazooka. Well, maybe you're not, or an AR-15, maybe you're not, or a long rifle. I do believe the understanding of the Second Amendment, and you've got your protecting your family, but the number of people who protect their family with a loaded gun sitting under their pillow when someone sneaks into the room is just so minor compared to all the death and the destruction and the horror associated with gun violence. And it's in the streets. We've got to rein it in, but do it under tracing. I also believe very strongly in the idea of bullet tracing. You can fingerprint every bullet coming out of every gun, so you know exactly where it goes. So let's just keep track of every single one of them. The second part of that having to do with dying with dignity, absolutely. Suffering has no place. If you force someone else to suffer, that is cruelty. I do believe that you've got to have all the information. You need to know what the chances are. You need to know in consultation with your family, with your faith leaders, with your, especially with your doctor, to know what how real is this pain and suffering. But I do believe that someone at that phase in their life should have the liberty and the freedom to be able to make the choice saying, I do not want to suffer, I do not want to hurt. And it would also then reduce suffering and the hurt of those around watching somebody who is in pain and misery and suffering for year after year. And unfortunately, almost one unfortunate part of our wonderful medical capabilities is we can keep people alive almost forever. Let's end that.
Great, thank you. Jason Woodard, same question.
So I want to give a shout out to President Biden from the State of the Union last night, who spoke about the assault weapons ban that we need within this country. And I think that Maryland at least has been a very good progressive force in gun safety, and the bills that have been passed and will likely be passed this year continue that streak. I will say though that in addition to the bills that are passed, we still have an issue, and I'm fearful that it's not going to go away anytime soon, in part because the interstate transfer sometimes of weapons, but also the public health component, the mental health aspects that we're really still not able to address adequately. When people read something on a Facebook post or they hear about something that somebody has said and they just say, oh, that's bizarre, that's weird, because there's a concern that they don't want to elevate it too much to give it credence. or to cause somebody to get in trouble. But I think that we need to do a better job of identifying these issues as they occur in real time, so we can help people to get the support that they need. I also think that it's important moving forward, to echo a little bit of what Scott said, because I think there's a little bit more focus that needs to be on gun safety classes, because there is the ability to have an appropriate gun in your possession. And I think that there's got to be more training before anybody should be able to ever have that or purchase one on their own. And it's certainly age restrictions are important. And as it goes to dying with dignity, absolutely. All too often we have too much of an issue where people don't want to say.
Ariana Kelly, same question.
Thank you so much. And I did mention the End of Life Options Act earlier in my remarks, but I will say I'm on that committee in the House, and I would be on that committee in the Senate. And I've already voted for it in the past. And I think it's important, if anyone who's talking about bills where there's a 1 or 2 vote margin, nothing is more valuable than a known vote, right? Having voted for something in the past significantly increases your likelihood for voting for it in the future. It's hard to take these hard votes. And I will tell you, and the folks from Moms Demand and every town who are on this call, they know, right? I've been doing this for 12 years. There is no more challenging group of opposition than the folks who are opposing gun safety legislation. I was there for the vote on a former Attorney General, former Senator, then Senator Brian Frosch's amazing major omnibus gun safety legislation. And, we were there until the middle of the night. It was, I did the abortion bill, and I am telling you, the gun bills are 2 or 3 times as hard. I have nothing but respect for both the legislators who lead on those bills, including Senator Lee, who put up a good fight and did a lot of amazing work, but also the advocates who work in that space. And I tell them that every time I meet with them. All of us, everybody who's on this Zoom cares so much about our children and the future. I chair the Public Health and Minority Health Disparities Subcommittee, and we had a briefing 2 weeks ago about the public health impact of gun violence. And we heard from our hospitals about what that is actually like, about what it costs, both in dollars and in emotional and trauma response, the gun violence epidemic, just from a healthcare perspective. And it was a devastating briefing, but I'm glad we did it. We did it in order to support those gun reform bills that are going through the Judiciary and JPR committee this year. There are some really important bills that have already been introduced.
Great. Thank you, Ariana. Here's a couple more combined questions. What is your position on paid family and medical leave? That's the first question. And the second is, what is your position on reducing state taxes on all sources of retirement income? So paid family and medical leave and reducing taxes on retirement income. We'll start with Ariana Kelly, go on to Scott Weber, and then Jason Woodard.
Thank you for the question. The retirement income question is a tough one, right? It's really a challenge. It's something that we have struggled with over the last many years in the legislature, because we know we need to see some positive action in that space. And I will speak for myself, was very happy to co-sponsor Governor Moore's legislation on veterans retirement income this year. So that is some progress. We made some progress last year as well on retiree income. I think there is a balance to be found based on the income threshold, right? We can't completely eliminate all retirement income, but I am, as a general rule, have worked so hard to address poverty among the elderly. It is one of the things that I care most deeply about. I'm kind of obsessed with this issue. When I talk about family economic security, it's just as important for the young children as it is for the seniors. And seniors face so many financial challenges, and I am open for all of those innovative policies that can help prevent seniors from facing not just poverty, but hardship, above the poverty line, but hardship levels of lives that they shouldn't have in their senior years. I am offended by that. The first question was paid family and medical leave. I already talked quite a bit about that, but I will say that as again, I brought that bill to the state. I used to work for Moms Rising. I worked on that issue on the federal and the state level. I wanted Maryland to be the 4th state to do it. We ended up being the 11th. It was hard to get that bill through. Sometimes you need more than 71 votes in the House, right? But I was able to persevere. And again, it's not I, right? It's we. I was able to partner with a lot of colleagues and a lot of advocates, a lot of people on the ground, so many groups on the ground made that happen. So love that bill. Would talk about it all day long if I had the time. Thank you.
Scott Weber, your position on paid family and medical leave and position on reducing state taxes on all sources of retirement incomes. Mr. Weber.
Paid family leave is one of those that has a not an immediate benefit, but especially the long term, whether it's maternity leave or whether it's sickness, that if you are able to support and provide a quality of life and a quality of time with a young infant, with someone who is sick, the end result is that you have healthier families, you have healthier children, you have both mentally, emotionally healthier. If it has to do with going for your children to make sure that they are healthy infants that become healthy elementary school kids, that become better students, that become better workers, the long-term benefit is just incalculable. To basically have to run out on your children, throw them into some daycare right away just because you have to have a job to be able to feed them, it breaks down so many of the important critical elements that start in those formative years, the first few years, the first few months. And I think it should go not only to the mothers, but it also needs to be to the fathers as well. I mean, to spend time as a family bonding with your children is critical at those first years. And it builds family ties as well to create better, healthier families. The idea of retirement income, I'm all around thresholds. Just as we do with the income tax, as President Biden is talking about, anyone who makes more than $400 or less than $400,000 is not going to be impacted. Well, same thing with retirement. If you've got many millions of dollars in retirement, you don't need the same type of help that you do that somebody's just scraping by with Social Security and maybe a little pension, if not that. And when you're at risk of losing your house and you don't heat it and you don't have enough food to eat at those years, it makes misery. And so the quality of life of our community has to be thought about in a whole, not only at those early years, but especially in the late years. So there's not only a dignity in dying, but there's a dignity in final life that you can then contribute to your community. You can be with those who you need to spend time with in those senior years. So I absolutely do believe in retirement income. That's right.
Jason Woodard, same question.
So I'm quite familiar with the federal FMLA, and I recall even dealing with coworkers who were worried when they would be out, whether or not they were going to be treated poorly when they would be coming back into the workplace, and struggling with also men who wanted to spend time at home with their family and how that was shunned and looked down upon. So I think we need to start normalizing the importance of family. And the most important time is in a child's newborn status, where you're getting the love and the attachment that is necessary for the family. And it shouldn't have to be a stressful time. I think what we have to do is also develop programs and opportunities that will allow small businesses some mechanism to support family medical leave as well, which can be more difficult. And I've known other people that will just leave the workplace entirely because they feel that they can't juggle that small business environment versus something that's larger with a lot more benefits available to them. And as it relates to retirement, I do believe that we need to create a bill, we need a law that's going to be similar to HB 554, which I believe that Delegate Kelly referenced earlier with the Keep Our Heroes Home Act. Maryland is one of in the 8th or 9th worst places to retire, in part because of our taxation. And I think that we need to do something that's comparable to what we will do for veterans to ensure that we can keep these veterans, because these retirees, because they are also some of the smartest, most talented individuals that we have. And I think we need that to remain before they move out to some state that has a let's stay.
Okay, someone submitted this evening a question for Ariana and then a different question for Scott and Jason. The question for Ariana is, what did you learn from Senator Lee that would inform or help improve your role as state senator? And for the other two candidates, why did you choose to run for the Senate rather than running for the delegate positions in order to gain experience first? We'll start with Jason Woodard, go on to Ariana Kelly, and then Scott Weber.
I think it's important to have options. And I wanted to be able to submit my name in part to show my kids the importance of giving back. They see it on a day-to-day basis, but they also are cognizant of what's going on when they're watching the news with us. And talking about bills when they come home from school. And so being a part of that is important to me, and to continue the public service that I've had that nobody hears about or knows about, that's on a day-to-day basis for the last 25, 30 years. So I think that that provides a different perspective. I think there's nothing wrong with more voices being a part of the mix. And I also think I have an appropriate temperament to be the state senator for the district.
Ariana Kelly.
Thank you so much. And there's definitely nothing wrong with having multiple voices. I'm really enjoying this experience and the interchange between all of us. I love it. And one of the wonderful things about District 16 is we have so many amazing people who are interested in public service, and that's very rewarding. It's an amazing district to represent for that reason. So I have spent a lot of time thinking about this because it's a hard transition, right? When you lose your senator, and it was hard when Senator Frosch left, and it's hard to lose Susan. But I'm so happy for her that it makes it okay. I saw her picture last night at the State of the Union with the governor, and it warmed my heart because I love knowing that she's there doing that work on behalf of the whole state. I would say that what I learned so many things from Susan. I learned how to be a woman functioning in this legislature. I learned how to not let yourself be marginalized in this body. I learned from conversations with her about the differences between the Senate and the House, because she worked in both and she saw the differences, and she shared them with me, which I appreciate. But I'll go back to what I said earlier. First of all, Susan just did two things really well. Her relationship with the constituents was amazing. And what I learned from her and her connection with the constituents, and remembering everyone's names and sending birthday cards and remembering, I mean, even my kids, the warmth they feel towards her because she's great. It's not just my kids, it's everyone's kids, right? She knows the people in the district, and I learned from the constituents how much they value that. So that's huge. And the second thing was her patience. The woman has unbelievable patience. She has this spousal defense bill that Charlotte Crutchfield has in the House that she has worked on for multiple years, and I am taking that over from her should I get an appointment. If I get that appointment, then I'm hopeful we can get that bill across the finish line this year, but it would not be without her tremendous patience over many years to work incredibly hard on legislation. Thank you.
Scott Weber.
Why the Senate? Because there's an open seat. At the moment, we have three very, very capable delegates who are filling that role. And I don't mean any disrespect to Senator Lee, but I hold the highest regard to our current set of delegates, whether it's Delegate Love, Delegate Corman, and Delegate Kelly, who are doing almost what I consider to be equal work, just in a different body. So it's not that I see the Senate as being a totally separate set of skills. It's more a matter of the bodies in a bicameral system that need to work together. The delegates supposedly a little closer to the people, but I never saw that. Senator Lee was just as close to the constituents as our delegates are. So we've got a wonderful delegation of all four of them, but I don't see a huge split between them. That being said, the idea of being a senator currently in JPR, my ability, especially in the housing aspect, that has certainly basically nobody in the JPR that's doing any of that. It's a critical need. So I would be able to fill a slot that would not be filled by currently anybody else. They're not pushing it. They understand and they realize the need for it. There's just nobody there to do it. So I've got a unique slot that I can pop in there. And also to the degree, and I'm going to take some of my closing remarks in here too, is I've got to be able to, I can fill the shoes of Senator Lee. I'm a technologist. I understand cybersecurity. I understand human rights. I'm an advocate for everything that she was putting forth. And so there'd be very little separation between what I see in my positions to what Senator Lee had to offer. I don't have the experience. I don't have the full background there, but it certainly would have essentially the same vote. But I'd be able to add something on top of that that is currently missing in the Senate.
Okay, we are proud to say we have a high school student on tonight, a high school student activist, and the student would like to know, what can the state do to support students suffering from mental health problems? We will start with Scott Weber, go on to Jason Woodard, and then Ariana Kelly.
Mental health, just like physical health, we need gym classes. We need spaces and places to be able to strengthen our body, but not everybody is a star athlete. When it comes to mental health, everybody has mental health issues, just like everybody has physical health issues. What we've got to get to an understanding is that mental health is not a disease, it's a health issue. And we can create stronger, healthier minds, we can create stronger, healthier emotions, we can create stronger, healthier bodies. But we don't necessarily need to separate them into the statue of being a star athlete versus someone who has a mental issue. And we all have mental issues, and emotions are part of our human experience. So we've got to get to the point where we understand that it's okay. I mean, it's calm, it's normal to have mental health issues. You are sad, and if you're sad, get help. And if you're hurting and if you've scraped or got a cut, go to a doctor and get it bandaged up. But if you're having a mental hurt, reach out, find somebody who knows how to help solve it, how to fix it, how to keep an issue where you've got counselors who are around, where your peers are understand, where in no condition can you be bullied for it, whether it has to do with a physical disability, a mental health issue, and whether it's more a permanent disability, whether it's autism or somewhere on the spectrum, but we're all within there. So first one is education, to know that it's okay. We do have to have the resources in the school. But third, we have to have people who protect it. And if there's any abuse of those who are going through mental health issues, whether it's on the streets especially, we need to have crisis centers. I was a former EMT. I've been on the streets. When someone's in mental health, we have to recognize it as a mental health issue and deal with it directly, and have people who are trained in the professions to be able to identify when someone's in a mental health crisis, whether it is through substance abuse or whether it is something that is more biological. Recognizing it, treating as it is, healing it, and then moving forward with a healthier life.
Thank you. Jason Woodard.
So I view this somewhat personally because as a young child, I had a significant issue with my weight. I had trouble making friends. I was, to borrow Delegate Kelly's response earlier, the nerd. Who had a hard time trying to figure out where I was going to go in life and what that was going to be like, because I felt so different from everybody else, especially being gay in the state of Kansas. And I think that's just a natural progression when you also see so many children that are struggling even to determine what their sexuality is or whether or not they're transgender. And what's happened is social media has created a firestorm, which has only exacerbated the issue of mental health. And COVID didn't help either. I know with my own kids that there are some attachment issues and socialization issues that have been greatly impacted due to their time at home. And now going back into the community, into the school system, back into the club, there's an awkwardness and there's a fear. And what we have to do is we have to keep talking about this. We can't shun it to the side or push somebody into a room and say, no, you're fine, pull it together. We need to talk about it. There needs to be more discussion. There needs more programs, and we need to do more at the individual school level to make sure that they have those resources available to them anonymously.
Thank you. Ariana Kelly.
Thank you so much. So this is a space that I do a lot of work in. On the personal side, of course, I have teenage children. My son is a freshman in high school. My daughter is a freshman in college. My stepson is a freshman in college. I have another stepdaughter who graduated from college and is gainfully employed, and we're so proud of her. But those years are really challenging. So I want to just give honor to the high school student who is here participating and asking this question, because I have heard the same thing from the high schoolers who intern with me, the high schoolers who live in my house. This is an extraordinarily challenging time for the young population. I have a piece of legislation this year. It was the first bill to be voted out of the Senate. It was voted out unanimously. We haven't gotten it out of the House yet, but I expect to get it out of the House very shortly. It's a $12 million investment in the 988 Trust Fund. That's the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline for the state of Maryland. $12 million will make a huge difference in making sure groups like Every Mind, which operates the 988 Lifeline here in Montgomery County, have the resources they need to do the incredibly important work they do. But I also want to elevate some of the other work that is being done by people in the General Assembly. David Moon has a revolutionary, of course it's Moon, a revolutionary bill this year that is going to be a blueprint for behavioral health in the state of Maryland. And we're going to look at everything we can do to invest in behavioral health over the next many years in the state of Maryland. If you think about the blueprint for education, this is a blueprint for behavioral health. We're really going to invest in this, and Delegate Moon is leading that charge, and I am so proud of him and proud to support him. We're also working with the school psychologists in the state of Maryland. They're not able to bill Medicaid, and that is something that they're able to do in Virginia and other states. We want to make sure that those resources are available in the schools for kids when they're in the school and outside of the schools. One of the things that you learn quickly when you're working in healthcare and public health is you need to meet people where they're at. So we want to make sure that there are abundant resources available wherever they need. And finally, I would say that one of the biggest challenges that we're facing is clinicians. So we need to work on workforce. Thank you.
Great, thank you. The next question is, what is your position on whether the state of Maryland should protect and provide for the Afghans who did so much for us for 20 years and now live in the state? The first person to answer that will be Ariana Kelly, next Scott Weber, and next Jason Woodard.
Wow, great question. I've never gotten this one before in a District 16 forum, but yes, yes, and yes. I don't know what else there is to say. Of course, they have done so much for us, and we have a responsibility to support them. And people who are refugees and people who are immigrants need our support. Full stop. End of story. There's nothing I wouldn't do if I weren't asked for on this question. One of the things that we're doing in Maryland this year is looking at expanding Affordable Care Act coverage to people who are immigrants. And I think we have a study bill that I'm working with Delegate Cullison on. To a point that Scott Weber made earlier, I just want to make sure I'm clear to my constituents. There's not going to be any bills that are lost if I were appointed to the Senate. So the bill that I'm talking about is a Delegate Cullison bill that she's already holding my name on for in the Senate. I have 4 pieces of legislation that are in my name in the House. The others I have shared with other legislators, because one of the things I'm invested in is investing in my junior colleagues. So I have shared all of my legislation that I've been working on with other colleagues in the House, except for the 4 that I plan to pass if I were to be appointed before that appointment date. So I just want to make that clear. Didn't mean to change the subject, but wanted to clarify that as I was talking about making sure we have access to healthcare for folks who are refugees and immigrants. There's lots of things that we can do. There's nothing I wouldn't do for those people. Nothing I wouldn't do. Thank you.
Thank you. Scott Weber.
We are a nation of immigrants. We are people who came from other lands. This is even a further heightened situation. These are not just people who want to come to the United States to make a better living. These are people who gave, many of them, their lives, their families' lives. They risked everything that we were doing over there with our veterans. They risked as well. Quite a few of them are veterans themselves. They wore the uniforms. They were out there in the fields. They were literally putting in the same level of risk to their own life and to their families. In fact, even more so, because our troops get to come home. They had to stay there, and they had families. So the idea of this not making it not only an opportunity, but I think actually an obligation. We went to their land, and we created a situation, and we created risks for them. They reached out with their very lives to assist us in our mission. we have now the responsibility to make sure we care for those who cared for us. It's not just a matter of being moral or ethical. It is their life. I mean, they're at risk beyond our imagining. The fact that if they're just found to have been someone who associated with the United States, it's a death sentence quite often. So we have to understand how important that is. We need to be grateful and realize how much they have in what their contribution will be to this nation when they arrive. They're not just looking for a free handout. These are not just people coming over looking for free lunch and free healthcare. These are people who sacrificed, and we owe it to them, just as we do our own veterans, to thank them for their service for our country.
Jason Woodard.
As someone who's worn the uniform, I absolutely believe that we need to provide them all the benefits necessary for a full integration into society. Picking up on what Scott just said, this is a life and death thing for them if they were to remain where they were in Afghanistan, because of the levels of commitment they were providing to us was a death sentence had they stayed there. And I think that the issue, though, is not just how to bring them over here and provide them some level of support and benefit, because that's absolute. That has to be done. But I think it's also to ensure that we've done a proper integration for not only the individual, but to make sure that their family is here, that they are together as a familial unit, that we are providing the appropriate education, socialization, healthcare, job security. Those are all components that are going to be necessary. It's not just one of those things that you pick them up, drop them in, provide some benefits, and away you go. That's not going to work, because when you look at the level of commitment that they've provided for us, we need to provide that level of commitment back to them, period, full stop.
Thank you. Now it's time for your 2-minute concluding remarks. We will begin with Jason Woodard. Ariana Kelly will be second, and Scott Weber will be third. Mr. Woodard.
I want to thank everyone tonight for allowing me this opportunity to meet with you, to answer your questions, and to hopefully provide you a little bit more of an insight into who I am. I'm committed to this district. You know, there's a reason that I left the place where I grew up to move to Maryland to make this my home. This is my home. This is where my family is. This is where my kids are, where they play, where they go to school. And I want to be able to provide that level of support as well to our constituents within the district and in Maryland, in Annapolis. I think it's important to have a diversity of voice. I'm glad that we're all here tonight to have this conversation. I think that I'm a great candidate for this position based upon a very varied background in education, public health, military, government, oversight, small business. I'm not going to deny that I have not been doing the work that Ariana Kelly has been doing for the last 12 years. But I've been doing a lot of work as well in a very varied interests areas. And I believe that that would serve us well in the Senate.
Ariana Kelly.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the District 16 Democrats, to the Central Committee, to Scott and Jason for being here tonight. I think this was really fun. I really enjoyed this. I think it was a good evening for us to talk about issues that matter. I love the dialogue and the discourse that we're creating. I think it embodied that cooperative and collaborative spirit of our community. In District 16, and I talked about this earlier tonight, we have this tradition. It started back in the days of Brian Frosch and Nancy Kopp of working collaboratively, not competitively, to serve our district. It's better that way for our constituents, for our community. If I were to receive the Senate appointment, and I really hope I do, I am deeply committed to continuing that tradition of teamwork. I say every time we have these District 16 club meetings, right? Teamwork makes the dream work. I believe in it. I recognize that Susan Lee was a trailblazer for the AAPI community and a champion for immigrant communities and communities of color. And I can't be her, but I did learn from her. And we talked about that tonight. I share her values, and I promise to carry on her work in this space to the best of my ability. I promise to prioritize mentoring and elevating new leaders from underrepresented communities, because I value that work too. We didn't get to talk about that tonight, so I just wanted to mention that because it's an important part of our shared community values, I think, and it's an important part of the work that I do. I am glad I had the opportunity tonight to talk about my experience and my accomplishments. And I hope that you can agree with Mark and Sarah, my teammates, and the hundreds of neighbors who have already signed my letter to support me in my appointment to finish Susan's term. I would just close by saying, because this is a District 16 forum, that I'm the only candidate here tonight that has knocked on all the doors in the district. I know every block of this district. I know every neighborhood. I know the schools. I know the neighborhood associations. I know the parks. And I think you can tell I'm doing an okay job because the voters just sent me back overwhelmingly. So I think I'll do a good job as your senator. I know I will try really hard. I know I have the experience to do it. I know I have the passion. Thank you. I really hope I can count on your support.
Scott Weber.
Our thanks as well, not only to the Montgomery County Democratic Central Committee, to the D16 Democratic Club. This is what democracy is all about. It's down in the streets, it's in the communities. I do want to thank Delegate Kelly and also Mr. Woodward. I would be proud and happy to have either of you sitting in a Senate seat, and you would hear from a lot from me, because that's what this is about. Is we've got to share it. We've got to have somebody in there in that seat actually casting the votes and doing the work and the research. But it would not be a disappointment to have either of you there. That being said, I think I actually have, as I alluded in my introduction, I have a wealth of diversity I don't think is currently sitting in the Senate. I do run a technology consulting business. I'm a problem solver literally by profession, and there are very few technologists currently sitting in the Senate. I can fill Senator Lee's cybersecurity shoes and much more. I'm a realtor. Currently, there are no housing experts sitting in the Senate, but we need people there pushing those type of bills, and there is not anything there at the moment. I'm a former EMT, so I'd be one of the only first responders sitting there in the chamber, but I know what it's like to be on the front lines and in the streets, addressing substance abuse or mental health crises, people who are truly hurting, and the need when people come to emergency rooms just because they don't have health care. At Purdue University, I recognize mental health as being a critical issue, so actually I founded a SOS, student-oriented services, where students would come in and be basically peer support services, and getting people who can talk to you, understand you, is critical. I am a grassroots community activist, and so what I would bring to the Senate is indeed someone who takes what's needed in the streets, who's aware of literally the groups that are out there shouting and yelling, and bring it to the Senate to be able to advocate on their behalf with good legislation that means something to the people of the streets from a very unique perspective. Again, I thank all of you for being here. To me, this is democracy, and I will fight for everyone's voice to be here, share what they think, have wonderful, compassionate, passionate dialogue. It is a community that is delightful to be a part of. Thank you.
Great. Before I turn the program over to Elliot again, I'd like to thank all of the candidates. As a District 16 resident, I'm really proud that we have so many people in District 16, particularly these candidates who are so knowledgeable, capable, and passionate in their desire to serve. So thank you very much for participating this evening. Elliot?
Okay, thank you, Karen, for moderating. It was just a wonderful job you did asking the questions. And thank you to the three candidates, to Ariana, to Scott, and to Jason, for sharing your views with us and sharing your goals with us, and for having a very enlightened discussion tonight. And so on behalf of the District 16 Club, I want to thank the audience for attending. It's always good to have be able to have these forums, and thank the MCDCC for sponsoring this with us, and especially to Michael Tardif for handling the logistics of tonight's webinar. And so just really thank you to everyone for who supported this effort.